According to legend, a young woman took her elderly father's place to be drafted in the army to defend against an invasion of barbarians from the north. With her father too old and her younger brother too young, she cut her hair short, donned men's clothing, and went away with the draft officer for a life of hard fighting for 10 years. This is the legendary story of Mulan, a folktale from the northern and southern dynasties period in the 5th century AD. The dusty, windswept scenery of Hua Mulan's story paints the picture of a chaotic realm where savage barbarian nomads seep through the porous border to plunder, rape, and steal, a far cry from the stability of the Han times and even the times of the Three Kingdoms where the northern border was well defended. The landscape is unrecognizable to previous centuries. To the south is a legacy rump state created from the defunct Jin dynasty, a mere shadow of the splendor of Han Chinese civilization, and to the north is a kingdom made of nomad barbarians that first conquered the Chinese, then pretended to be Chinese, all while defending their newfound territory from other equally savage nomad barbarians. Both halves of China would squabble for over 2 centuries over who would inherit the mantle of Chinese civilization. How did this happen? This period of history, from the time of the close of the Three Kingdoms period to the Tang Dynasty, is known by many names. The Jin Dynasty, the 6 Dynasties period, the 5 Barbarians in 16 Kingdoms era, the Northern and Southern Dynasties, etc. And so, due to it not cleanly being boxed into an easily recognizable part of Chinese history, it often gets talked about much less. After the fall of the Han Dynasty, China entered a tumultuous period known as the Three Kingdoms era, characterized by the division of the country into 3 rival states, Wei, Shu, and Wu. This era from 220 to 280 AD was marked by intense warfare, political intrigue, and significant cultural developments. Each of the 3 kingdoms would ultimately meet their downfall to a clan native to the kingdom of Wei called the Sima clan. Shu, Wu, and Wei would all meet their downfall in one way or another due to the powerful Sima clan who would go on to found the dynasty known as the Jin dynasty. Han China was a golden age of world civilization. However, after its reunification by the Jin, after almost a century of legendary turmoil, China had faded from its peak and would never regain its former glory for hundreds more years until the time of the Tang dynasty in the 7th century. The Jin, whilst achieving temporary stability in the realm, merely acted as a custodian of the empire before meeting its fate only 50 years later. This turmoil began with an internal struggle known as the War of the 8 Princes, a series of civil wars amongst the ruling elite that severely weakened its central authority. This period of infighting, which lasted from 291 to 306 AD, drained the dynasty's resources and undermined its ability to govern effectively. The roots of the War of the 8 Princes lay in the struggle for control over the throne and the influence over the young emperor Sima Zhong, who was perceived as mentally incapable of effective rule. With the empire's military resources divvied up amongst the ambitious princes, the years 291 to 306 would see the Jin dynasty cannibalize itself in a series of civil wars over the throne. Although the civil war had devastated the central government's authority and drained the empire's resources, the seeds of the Jin's downfall was born in the imported foreigner barbarian armies that were conscripted in mass by the princes to fight in the civil wars against each other. These barbarians were forcefully settled in the northern border after the wars were completed, and when the Jin dynasty was at its weakest, the barbarians mutinied against their rulers. This would be the beginning of an enormous ethnic transformation of China that would open the way for foreign culture and change the very nature of the Chinese national identity. This tribal confederacy, known as the 5 Barbarians, had swept through North China, sacking the capital of Luoyang and killing the Jin emperor along with 30,000 civilians in 311 AD. In the chaos, a scion of the imperial house fled to re-establish the Chinese heartland in the old Three Kingdoms capital of Eastern Wu, which would come to be known as Nanjing. This was the first time the Chinese capital had moved so far south, and with it came the peopling of South China with Han Chinese people. This would be the origin of the Hakka ethnic group, who were Han Chinese people from the north, who were forced to flee south due to the barbarian invasions. Their name means guest people, and have since become a predominant ethnic group to southern China and still hold the same name. The conquering of China from these northern tribes had broken down the gateway held firmly for centuries by the Chinese, which was now flooded with different cultures and ideas, particularly Buddhism, which hitched a ride with missionaries preaching the teachings of the Buddha from the Kushan Empire, a Central Asian empire long forgotten to history. The barbarians who conquered and settled the Chinese heartland would become Sinicized over time, and hence Han Chinese Sinicization had spread both north and south. But the effect these barbarians had on the ethnic makeup of China is very similar to how the Vikings reformatted the ethnic makeup of Europe. The 5 barbarian tribes would splinter into 16 short-lived kingdoms until eventually being unified by one dominant tribe, the Xianbei barbarians. Jumping out of the primordial soup, they quickly adopted Chinese imperial customs and founded a 150-year-long imperial dynasty known as the Northern Wei in 386 AD, the kingdom and time period that Mulan was from. This dichotomy between a consolidated barbarian kingdom in the north and the legacy Han kingdom in the south would establish the period known as the Northern and Southern Dynasties period from 420 to 589 AD. The Eastern Jin dynasty, now based out of Nanjing, would officially end when a general named Liu Yu mutinied and usurped the throne in 420 AD, leading to a succession of short-lived dynasties that would control the South Han Chinese kingdom. By the time of this period, the Sinicized northern barbarians had adopted Chinese imperial tradition and culture entirely and didn't see themselves as any different to the old Chinese who had fled south. The male members of the Northern Wei imperial family were all arranged to be married with leftover Han Chinese elites' daughters, uniting the ethnic Xianbei barbarians with the Han Chinese by blood. This would give the North legitimacy to their rule, even to those in the South. The Sinicization of the Xianbei barbarian rulers created a rift between their aristocracy and the bulk of the barbarians, who still held on to the nomadic existence that they had cultivated in the Eurasian steppe for centuries. With the now civilized rulers favoring a more sedentary life in a cosmopolitan atmosphere, the clansmen that made up the bulk of the victorious conquering armies fell further and further behind socially and economically, with each successive generation leading to discontent and eventually rebellions. This would lead to the Northern Wei court being betrayed by one of their own generals, who had the Empress Dowager and the young emperor thrown into the Yellow River, while establishing his own puppet ruler to maintain authority. As conflict swelled in the north between successive leaders, Gao Huan, representing the interests of the traditional steppe tribes people, took control of the east and Luoyang, and his rival Yuan Tai, who took control of the west, was dominated by Sinicized nobles and their Han bureaucrats. Both of these leaders made a clean break from the Northern Wei, forming their own rival imperial dynasties, the Northern Qi and the Northern Zhou. The Northern Zhou associated the Sinicization that occurred to have had a corrupting influence, softening their descendants from their once warrior-like barbarian conquering ways. So they went into a period of reactionarianism, reverting to the old nomadic ways. They went back to old steppe nomadic fighting tactics, lifestyles, and even went as far as changing their names to old Xianbei names, even for the Han Chinese living in the Northern Zhou. The revival of the old Xianbei warrior culture ultimately proved successful, and they were able to defeat their Northern Qi rivals. With the North once again reunified, there was one prominent figure who wasn't entirely happy about the barbarian de-Sinicization. He wanted to re-Sinicize the de-Sinicized Sinicized barbarians, if that makes sense. Or in other words, he wanted the barbarians who stopped pretending to be Chinese to pretend to be Chinese again. This prominent figure, known as Duke Yangguang of Sui, would emerge to the fore to take control of the Northern Zhou and would embark on the Reunification of the Northern Kingdom, and with that, the desire to claim the mandate of heaven to reunite China once more under one rule. In 581 AD, this ambitious duke would overthrow the Northern Zhou and coronate himself as emperor, with the people of the Southern Dynasty having held firmly the belief that the North was a kingdom of barbarians. The Emperor of Sui would propagate the message of his right to rule, tracing his ancestry back to Han Chinese royalty, whilst claiming that the Emperor of the South was a decadent emperor. The Southern Kingdom, which in its final form was known as the Chen Dynasty, had kept the Northerners at bay for centuries by the use of its powerful navies along China's waterways. Empress Sui in turn built an enormous armada of thousands of boats in the Yangtze, one of which was a 5-deck tall ship that had a crew of 800 men. With over 500,000 soldiers, the Southern Chen dynasty couldn't withstand the assault and the country was once again reunited, temporarily under the Sui dynasty. The dynasty would only last for 37 more years until it was usurped and conquered from within by the Tang dynasty, reigniting a prosperous and peaceful golden age in Chinese history. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like my videos, please consider subscribing to my Patreon page for as little as $5 a month. It does a lot to keep this channel going and improve the quality of the videos. You can also send me a direct message at any time if you have any question about Chinese history or if you have any recommendation for the kind of video you want to see. And if you aren't already, make sure you're subscribed and I'll see you next time.